Welcome to the last and final lecture for this section of the course covering the Aztec and their precursors, as well as the earliest communities of Mesoamerica. Now we move to Aztec Conquest. The Aztec Empire really didn't rise to power until maybe the late 1400s and up until, contact with Europeans in 1519. So we're going to cover the Aztec Empire, Spanish settlement, and then the exploration of Spanish into Mexico, courtesy of primarily the first leader, like Pizarro, in South America among the Inca, but Hernan Cortez, a number of different battles, how he moved about and used translators in geopolitics, and then eventually the fall of Tenochtitlan, which was the capital of the Aztec Empire. This is what the Aztec Empire looked like at its height at around 1519, around the time of contact with Europeans and conquistadors. You can see that there are core tributary and allied states that are a component of the Aztec Empire. So they had the core state, which included the Valley of Central Mexico, Tenochtitlan as their capital and surrounding areas. But they also had tributary states, those that they had conquered, and then people who were paying tribute in terms of labor and other goods and services to the Aztec and to the empire. There were also allied states that had an alliance with Tenochtitlan. You can see shaded in, looks like, I don't know, puce, which is like a purple red thing color. And you also notice that another state known as Tlaxcala isn't affiliated with any of these. So understand that the Aztec did not have very kind of comprehensive empire in terms of power and authority over this region. There are a few gaps here and there that show you that there are areas that weren't aligned with the Aztec. As a matter of fact, some of them were bitter enemies. We all remember that in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Columbus arrived at an island in the Bahamas known as San Salvador that they renamed. And then they heard about more powerful chiefdoms on Hispaniola, which is modern-day Dominican Republic, and Cuba. They settled Cuba, they set up a governorship, and they also hear about wealth and riches directly west. Matter of fact, some of the people in the Caribbean had gold and silver. There's maybe some silver deposits in the Lesser Antilles, very small, minute, but there is no gold. And so when explorers and conquistadors asked them, where'd you get this gold? They said, there's a mainland directly west, and we traded with people. So that's where we got it. And that caused, an interest in, this area of North America or Central America. And in 1519, Cortez and his crew make landfall, and they eventually populate this region of the world and move around to other areas. Hernan Cortez was a Spaniard. He was living in Cuba, and he was hired by the Spanish governor to explore Mexico, and he did so with 500 men and 11 ships. He begins to sail for Mexico, and he lands there in February of 1519. Cortez in February 1519 lands on the Gulf Coast of Mexico in a town called Villa Rica de la Veracruz, very close to places like Tula, and now it's condensed to Veracruz. And, the legend is that when native people saw their tall ships, they thought they were mountains moving as they were, heading toward shore, which might make a little sense that they had not seen a large vessel like this before, but certainly when it came closer, they knew exactly what it was. When Cortez lands, he begins interacting with the native people, and matter of fact, he does it in a way where he engages warfare. So he meets some resistance at a site called Sempoaya, and this is where he conquers his first city. And so he is not met with much resistance in doing this. The Spanish, they had horses, they had guns, they also had steel weapons. After the conquering of Sempoaya, Hernan Cortez runs into a shipwrecked priest that was shipwrecked in the Maya region, and his name was Geronimo Aguilar. And he had been shipwrecked long enough that he could actually speak Mayan. And he joined Hernan Cortez's troop as a translator for particularly those individuals that speak Mayan. So in terms of translation, the Geronimo Aguilar is only one piece of the puzzle. The other is Malinche. And Malinche is an interesting story because she's like a hero or a traitor. It depends on how you look and view her. Was she a slave noblewoman? That also is kind of like an oxymoron. But she was kind of gifted to the Spanish because she could speak Mayan and Nahuatl. And this was, part of some of the agreements that Cortez made with Sempoaya and, other villages, towns, and cities in that area. And the key here was that Malinche could also speak Mayan, right? And in order to know somebody that could speak Mayan, you'd have to go probably at least to the Yucatan to do this. And Aguilar, that's where he was shipwrecked. So he already knew that language. And since Malinche could speak Mayan and also the language that the Aztecs and the surrounding people spoke, now we think Nahuatl was the lingua franca, which means that everybody spoke that in the Valley of Mexico and surrounding areas, but there were probably other languages that we also know of, even that survived in today, like Zapotec. But she could speak Mayan and Nahuatl, and she was baptized so that she was, she was faithful to the Spaniards and being missionized, because that was another component of them justifying colonization. Malinche was able to translate the Nahuatl into Mayan, and Geronimo Aguilar could translate the Mayan into Spanish. And so that was a key maneuver for Cortez and the Spanish army in order to navigate and move around the premises. So as Cortez has a nice, foothold in Veracruz and in Sempoaya, he has, as translators, and now he inquires about other people around in the area. And, they talk about the Aztec. They talk about, their relationship with that state or empire. And the Aztec emperor, Montezuma, actually did get some notification. So he was tipped off that somebody had arrived, otherworldly, other continental, probably type of arrival. And Montezuma actually sends out gifts to Hernan Cortez, kind of saying, glad you're here or something, and you don't need to come any further, enjoy. And some of those gifts included gold. And Montezuma, and probably only his family and a select few people, had ownership of gold in Aztec society. And this is because it's rare, it's scarce, hard to get. And it was also, to the Aztec, it was the excrement of the gods. That's the legend. And, this was very sacred stuff. And guess what the effect of gifts of gold had on the Spaniards? ... Well, they wanted to know where there was more, of course. What Cortez learned at Sempoala is that the state of Tlaxcala is actually an enemy of the Aztec Empire. It was not a nearby state that could be integrated for whatever reason. And matter of fact, the Aztec had been subjecting them for quite some time, probably to gain prominence in that whole area. And so he convinces the king of Tlaxcala that, hey, come on in alliance with me. I've got troops, I've got translators, and we can take down the Aztec Empire. And the Tlaxcala king is absolutely in. He's willing to be a part of that. And this is the geopolitical play that Cortez and the Spanish perform in order to get a better idea of the area to navigate, because there's mountains and plateaus and some very difficult terrain in this area, the central basin of Mexico along Lake Texcoco. So, as well as he brings troops of the Tlaxcala with him. This is a painting by Diego Rivera, and this is the reconstruction of Tenochtitlan. Tenochtitlan was a city that had been like kind of artificially set up like Machu Picchu, where they build terraces, but they filled in parts of Lake Texcoco, as well as, you know, created all sorts of waterway technology in order to divert water to different areas. They probably use lots of stilts and ramps and kind of boardwalks or decks, you would think of, because it was a canal city. And when the Spaniards arrived, they likened it to Venice, like finer than Venice, and it was very clean. They talked about how amazingly clean the place was, and it had what we think about 250,000 people at 1519. Now that's an, you know, otherworldly figure when you think about, you know, number of cities that were populated in parts of Europe were only in the tens of thousands, right? Or maybe reaching 100,000 or so. This was 250,000 people, and it was a very impressive city. They saw purportedly the main temple of Tenochtitlan in the center, all sorts of other subsidiary temples, with a whole, you know, grid of canals, with you know, entire whole settlement to boot, and people living there and prosperous. And here is the quote for you. You can have it. It's from Bernal Diaz del Castillo, and talking about you know, happening on Tenochtitlan and seeing the pyramids, seeing the monumental architecture, and look, enchanted, right? Thought that it was a dream. Never even seen or heard of these things before. And Cortez then marches all the way to the center, and he meets Montezuma. And, you know, and from this point onward, of course, a lot of this is, you know, some of the accounts of the Spanish, and so we don't know how accurate that is. It was particularly, we don't get the Aztec point of view, but what looks like is that, you know, Cortez basically just moves in. So the Spanish do stay at Tenochtitlan, and they lodge in the palace with Montezuma, and he's immediately taken prisoner by Cortez, and then he has some other things that he needs to do on Veracruz with new armies and reinforcements. So he has to go back there, and then while he's gone, what happens is the Spaniards, they are on watch in a part of the city, and there's like a massacre, and it had to do with some of the troops thinking that they were heathens, right? Or polytheists, not Christian, by the way. And so there was a massacre where some of the guards just got disgruntled and started killing a number of Aztec, and then the Aztec actually fight back. They assemble their army, and then, you know, after some of this unrest, Montezuma, you know, apparently is trying to quell some of this, to calm things down, and then he is killed. And this is where we don't quite know. Some people have suggested that he came out on the terraces of his palaces, right on the balcony of his palace, and that he maybe was hit by a rock by an Aztec person that was angry because he let the Spaniards basically, occupy the city. Or did the Spaniards kill him? We have no idea. The record is completely unclear. But after that, another emperor takes over, Cuitlahuac, and the Spanish fight their way out of Tenochtitlan at the night. So, however Montezuma dies, whose hands? Nobody is very happy. And, Montezuma was the Mexica emperor. And you can have the other Mexica emperor that takes over, and regardless, they were unhappy, and they start fighting the Spanish, trying to push them completely out. And of course, many are killed on both sides. Some of the Spanish actually are able to get out, but the other legend is that some of them died because they tried to carry out too much gold, that they had weighed their packs down so much that they were getting killed because it was so heavy and they couldn't escape. So after La Noche Triste, you have the siege of Tenochtitlan. The Spanish army regroups. The Tlaxcalan allies are ready to fight. And as they march to Tenochtitlan, they actually start conquering and defeating other allies around the core state, of the Mexica Empire, Aztec Empire. So then they march to Tenochtitlan and they take over the city quite handily, and they actually input a new emperor. So this was still, when you have some of these like warfaring, oftentimes there's quick exchanges of different top levels, particularly if there's no secure leadership underneath maybe your top leader, like maybe for instance Montezuma. Pretty much the last, of the Mexica emperor surrenders at about August 13th, 1521. The Aztecs are, have been fighting a bloody war and trying to defend their city and their homeland. They were also sick because they were not immune to smallpox. We think that a good number of them were very sick with smallpox as well, because the Europeans had already gained immunity to that disease on another side of the world. They were hungry and they were sick and they were dying. And the Spanish basically ransacked the city and they knock all the temples down to the ground and they burn it. Then what they did was erect a cathedral on top of the main temple at Tenochtitlan. And that is now the current cathedral that is in the Zócalo in Ciudad de Mexico and Mexico City. So, and it's a beautiful sight still, but you can still see the, the archaeology right around this area. And here you are at the Zócalo in Mexico City, and it's known as the Plaza of de Tres Culturas, because you have all three cultures. You have indigenous culture, you have Spanish culture, and then you have the merging of both, and then you have even the future. But you can see another image of cathedral, and you can see the main estate palace. And this is formerly where the main temple of Tenochtitlan and the Aztec, as well as even probably the palace of the emperor. As you navigate, right, as you navigate around Mexico City and behind the cathedral, you have the main temple known as the Templo Mayor. And there are bits and places around the cathedral proper where you can see through glass and actually view the stone and mortar work that they used to construct it. But here is where the main part of it is that they discovered, that is on, goodness, I want to say like 10 other temples. It was continually upkept. It was made larger and broader over time. And it was a very massive structure, at contact with Europeans. It is very well preserved. They still excavate parts of this, as well as anytime Mexico builds another part of their subway or expands their metro, they'll usually find another temple or a dwelling. There are a number of different places, and some of them are preserved in the metro station. It's kind of remarkable. But the Templo Mayor, we're pretty sure, has been identified, and there's really good reconstructions even of the city, because right above the Aztec layer is the Spanish material. So that'll conclude the Aztec Conquest, and I hope you enjoyed that lecture.